Hello, everyone. Welcome to Blacktop Files. Tonight, we bring you 8 deeply unsettling testimonies from the cold country backroads, those forgotten stretches of asphalt that wind through Appalachia's hollows, past abandoned mines and shuttered company towns where something old and hungry still waits in the dark. These roads were built on the backs of men who went into the earth and never came back out. They connect communities that time forgot, places where the coal ran out but the shadows didn't, where the trees grow too close and the cell service dies before you even realize you're lost. The people who sent us these accounts all share one thing in common. They took a wrong turn or a shortcut, or just trusted their GPS through coal country when they shouldn't have. What they found out there in those hills, between the strip mines and the hollow houses, past the last gas station and the final warning sign, changed them forever. Some of them barely made it out. Others aren't sure they really did. If you got a long drive ahead of you tonight, you might want to save this one for when you're safely home. But if you're already on the road, well, just remember to keep your doors locked, your tank full, and whatever you do, don't stop if you see someone standing alone on the shoulder after dark. Let's begin.
This happened in October of 2019 when I was 31 years old. My name's David, I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I was driving through eastern Kentucky on my way to visit my sister in Knoxville. I'd made the drive a dozen times before, always sticking to I-75, but this time I was running late, and my GPS offered me a shortcut, a state route that cut through the mountains and promised to save me 45 minutes. It was already past 7 in the evening, the sun sinking behind the ridgelines, but I figured I could handle a back road. I'd grown up in the Midwest, driven through plenty of rural areas. How bad could it be? The highway exit dumped me onto Route 421, which immediately became something else. A narrow 2-lane road that twisted through dense forest, no shoulder, no guardrails, just crumbling asphalt, and the dark pressing in from both sides. The GPS said I'd be on this road for 37 miles before rejoining the interstate. Within the first 10 miles, I hadn't seen another car, not one house with lights on, nothing but trees, and the occasional rusted chain-link fence marking off some old industrial site. The radio started cutting out, just static and fragments of AM preachers, so I switched to a podcast on my phone. That lasted maybe 5 more miles before my signal dropped completely. I wasn't worried yet, just a little uneasy. The road kept climbing and descending, these steep grades that made my ears pop, and every time I came over a rise, I half expected to see lights, some sign of civilization, but it was always just more forest, more curves, more darkness. Around mile marker 15, I passed a town, if you could call it that. A cluster of buildings, maybe 8 or 10 structures total, all of them dark. Not closed for the night dark, but abandoned dark. Empty windows, sagging porches, one old gas station with the pumps torn out and weeds growing through the concrete. A faded sign read, Carver Pop 387, but that number had to be decades old. I didn't see a single person, not even a dog. The road got worse after that. Potholes I had to swerve around, sections where the asphalt had just given up and turned to gravel. My sedan wasn't built for this kind of terrain, and I started second-guessing the GPS, wondering if I should just turn around. But turning around meant another hour minimum, and I'd already come so far. I kept going. That's when I saw the hitchhiker. He was standing on the left side of the road, just past a curve, illuminated in my headlights like a statue. Tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3", wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His face was shadowed by the bill of a baseball cap, and he had his thumb out in the classic hitchhiking gesture. But something about his posture was wrong. Too still, too straight. Most hitchhikers will turn their head when they see headlights coming, show you their face, try to make eye contact. This guy didn't move at all. I slowed down instinctively. not to stop, just because he'd surprised me. And as I passed him, I glanced in my rearview mirror. He was still standing there, thumb out, facing the direction I'd come from now. Hadn't turned his body, hadn't lowered his arm, just rotated like he was on a turntable. My stomach went cold. I pressed the accelerator, putting distance between us, telling myself I'd imagined it, that it was just the angle and the darkness playing tricks. But my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. 10 minutes later, I saw him again. Same guy, same jacket, same posture, thumb out, standing on the left side of the road just past a curve. I was doing 60 by then, maybe 65, and there was no way, no possible way, he could have gotten ahead of me. The road hadn't intersected with anything, no trails, no driveways, nothing. Just unbroken forest on both sides. I didn't slow down this time. I blew past him doing 70, and I watched my rearview mirror, watched him shrink into the darkness behind me. My heart was hammering. I kept thinking about that rotation, that mechanical way he'd turned. I checked my mirrors obsessively, expecting to see him again, but the road behind me stayed empty. For about 3 miles. Then he was in front of me again. Not on the shoulder this time, in the road. Standing in my lane, thumb out, facing me, maybe 30 yards ahead. I slammed on my brakes, tires screaming, the ABS juddering under my foot, and I stopped maybe 10 feet from him. Close enough to see details now. Close enough to see that his face was wrong. It wasn't a shadow from the cap. He didn't have a face. Where his features should have been, there was just smooth, pale skin, like a mannequin that hadn't been finished. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just blank skin pulled tight over a skull-shaped head. I sat there, frozen, my high beams washing over him, and he didn't move, didn't lower his thumb, didn't react to the light or the car or me, just stood there waiting. Then I heard the tapping, tap, 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 tap. It was coming from the passenger window. I jerked my head to the right, and there was another one. Same height, same jacket, same blank face, standing right next to my car, tapping on the glass with one finger. Slow, deliberate, tap, tap, tap. I screamed. I don't care if that sounds weak. I screamed and threw the car into reverse and floored it. The tires spun, caught, and I rocketed backward, yanking the wheel, trying to turn around. The one in the road didn't move, didn't even track my car as I swerved past. I got the car pointed back the way I'd come and shifted into drive, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of them, all along the roadside, standing between the trees, thumb out, faceless, motionless. 30, maybe 40 figures, all perfectly still, all watching me with senses I couldn't understand. I drove. I drove faster than I've ever driven in my life, back toward that ghost town, back toward the highway, and they were everywhere. Standing in the ditches, standing in clearings, standing in the middle of the road, so I had to swerve around them, my tires catching gravel and nearly sending me into the trees. I don't know how long I drove like that. Time went strange. My gas gauge dropped from half a tank to a quarter, to nearly empty, even though it should have been impossible. And I kept passing landmarks I didn't remember seeing before. An overturned truck, a burned-out church, a billboard in a language I didn't recognize. The road twisted and forked, and I just took whatever turn felt right, felt less dark, felt less wrong. Eventually, I saw lights. Real lights. A truck stop, big rigs in the parking lot, fluorescent glow, people moving around inside. I pulled in so fast I nearly clipped a concrete barrier, and I sat there in the lot with the engine running and the doors locked, shaking so hard my teeth chattered. A trucker knocked on my window, a real person, with a real face, with concern in his eyes, and asked if I was okay. I rolled the window down an inch and asked him where I was. He said I was just off I-75, south of Corbin, Kentucky. I'd somehow ended up exactly where I'd been trying to go. He said I looked like I'd seen a ghost, asked if I needed him to call someone. I told him I was fine, thanked him, and sat there until sunrise. I never took that route again. I looked for it on Google Maps later, tried to retrace my path, but I couldn't find Route 421 where I'd entered it. The roads didn't line up. The town of Carver doesn't appear on any map I can find. I asked around online, in forums for people who drive through Appalachia regularly, and a few people said they'd seen the hitchhikers too. Always in coal country, always on the back roads, always faceless. One guy said his grandfather used to talk about them, called them the waiting men, said they'd been there since the mines first opened, that they take people sometimes, people who stop to help, and those people never make it home. I don't drive through Kentucky anymore. Not on the back roads, not at night, not ever. And if you do, if you have to, and you see someone with their thumb out standing too still, too straight, don't slow down. Don't look too close. And whatever you do, don't stop, because they're patient. They've been waiting a long time. They can wait a little longer.
Our next account comes from a woman who took a job as a traveling nurse and learned that some of coal country's old company towns never really closed down. They just went underground.
My name is Allison. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was 34 when this happened, back in the summer of 2017. I'd been working as a traveling nurse for about 3 years, taking contracts in rural hospitals across Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Ohio. The pay was good, and I liked the variety, the constant movement. I'd just finished a contract in Wheeling and picked up a new one in a small hospital in southern West Virginia, a place called Beckworth Regional Medical Center. The town itself, Beckworth, had a population of maybe 3,000, down from 15,000 in its heyday when the coal was still flowing. I drove down on a Sunday afternoon in late June, taking Route 19 through some of the most beautiful and isolated country I'd ever seen. Dense forests, steep hills, occasional glimpses of strip mines cut into the mountainsides like old wounds. I arrived just before dark, checked into a little efficiency apartment the hospital maintained for traveling staff, and tried to get my bearings. Beckworth was of a kind of town where everything closed at 6 except the Walmart and the gas station. People kept to themselves, drove trucks with faded bumper stickers about coal keeping the lights on, and gave you long looks if you were from out of town. My first week at the hospital was normal enough. The work was steady, lots of black lung cases, diabetes complications, the usual issues you see in economically depressed areas with limited access to preventive care. The staff were friendly but guarded, and I got the sense they'd seen plenty of nurses come and go. What struck me most was how many patients would come in with injuries they wouldn't explain. A broken wrist, a concussion, lacerations on their back. When I'd ask what happened, they'd just shake their heads and say it was an accident, or they'd fallen, or they'd been drunk, but their eyes would slide away and their family members would change the subject. After my second week, I got invited to a shift drink by one of the other nurses, a woman named Marcy, who'd been at Beckworth Regional for almost 20 years. We went to a dive bar on the edge of town, a place called the Tipple, and after a couple of beers, she started to open up. She asked me if I'd noticed anything strange about the patients. I mentioned the unexplained injuries, and she nodded slowly, like she'd been waiting for me to bring it up. "That's the Backroads," she said. "People around here, they use the old coal roads to get around, cut through the mountains instead of taking the long way on the highway. Problem is, some of those roads go through places they shouldn't, places where the old company towns used to be." I asked her what she meant, and she lowered her voice even though we were the only two people at the bar besides the bartender, who was at the other end watching a baseball game on a TV with terrible reception. Back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, the coal companies owned everything. The towns, the houses, the stores, even the churches. They paid in scrip, not real money, so you couldn't leave even if you wanted to. And when the coal ran out, or the seams got too dangerous, or the unions tried to organize, the companies would just shut everything down overnight. Lock the gates, turn off the power, leave. Most of the time, people cleared out, but not always. Sometimes folks stayed, and sometimes she trailed off, took a long drink. Sometimes the companies sealed them in, collapsed the road, dynamited the entrance to the hollow, just buried the whole town and moved on. I thought she was messing with me. It sounded like an urban legend, the kind of story locals tell to spook outsiders. But Marcy wasn't smiling. She was staring into her beer with an expression I recognized from work, the look people get when they're remembering something they wish they could forget. "There's one in particular," she said, "place called Shale Hollow, company town for the Raven Ridge Coal Company. It was about 8 miles up into the mountains, connected to Beckworth by a dirt road. In 1946, the miners went on strike. Company brought in strike breakers. Things got violent. Some of the strikers died. Officially, it was an accident, a roof collapse in one of the tunnels, but everybody knew the company had set charges. After that, the strike fell apart, but the company decided Shale Hollow was more trouble than it was worth. They pulled out, sealed the road with a rock slide, and that was that. Left about 200 people up there with no way out." "They couldn't just hike out?" I asked. Marcy shook her head. "Shale Hollow was in a narrow valley, cliffs on 3 sides, and the only road out was the one the company blocked. By the time anyone realized what had happened, winter had set in. Deep snow, temperatures below 0. A few people tried to make it out on foot. None of them made it. By spring, when the state finally sent someone to check, the whole town was dead. Starvation mostly. Some froze. Some..." She paused. "The official report said some of them had been murdered, cannibalized." I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warm summer air. Jesus. Yeah, they buried the whole thing, literally and figuratively. Poured concrete over the road, planted trees, let the forest take it back. But the road's still there, if you know where to look. And people still use it, especially locals who don't want to drive the long way around the mountain. They call it the shale cut. Most of the time it's fine. You drive through, you come out the other side, no problem. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, people see things. Lights in the woods where there shouldn't be any buildings, figures standing by the road. And sometimes people don't come out at all. I asked her if she'd ever driven it, and she gave me a look like I'd just suggested she jump off a bridge. Hell no, I know better. But my cousin did, about 10 years ago. He was coming back from a job site late at night and took the shale cut to save time. He said about halfway through, his headlights started flickering, and he saw buildings, houses, a church, a company store, all lit up with oil lamps, like it was the 1940s. He said he could see people in the windows, watching him. He floored it, tried to get through as fast as he could, but the road just kept going, like it was stretching out. He drove for an hour on a road that should only take 15 minutes. When he finally came out the other side, his gas tank was empty, and it was dawn. He'd lost 6 hours. And he had scratches on his car, long gouges in the paint, like something with claws had tried to hold him back. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to laugh it off, but Marcy wasn't the type to tell tall tales, and the look in her eyes was too genuine. "Just don't drive it," she said. "And if someone tells you to take the shale cut as a shortcut, say no." Of course, 3 weeks later, I drove it. It wasn't intentional. I'd been visiting a patient at their home way up in the hills, providing wound care for an elderly man with a diabetic ulcer. His family lived at the end of a long gravel road, and by the time I finished, it was nearly 9 at night. I was tired, and I'd gotten turned around on the way out. My GPS was useless, no signal, and I was relying on the directions the family had given me, but I must have missed a turn. I ended up on a narrow dirt road that plunged into the forest, trees so thick they formed a tunnel overhead, blocking out the stars. I drove for maybe 20 minutes, getting more and more anxious, before I saw a sign. It was old, wooden, half covered in moss, but I could still make out the words, "Shale cut, no trespassing." My stomach dropped. I stopped the car, considered turning around, but the road was so narrow and the forest so dense that I wasn't sure I could safely do a 3-point turn in the dark. And besides, I told myself, Marcy's story was just a story, local color. I'd drive through, come out the other side, and be back in Beckworth in 15 minutes. I kept going. The road descended steeply, switchbacking down into what felt like a valley, though I couldn't see much beyond the reach of my headlights. The trees here were different, older, thicker, their branches twisted and gnarled. The air felt heavy, pressing against the car, and I noticed my headlights were dimming, even though I'd just replaced the bulbs the month before. Then I saw the first house. It was set back from the road, barely visible through the trees, but I could see light in the windows. Warm, flickering light, like oil lamps or candles. The house itself looked old. Wood siding painted white but peeling, a sagging porch, a tin roof. Smoke was coming from the chimney. I slowed down without meaning to, staring at it, and that's when I realized there were more of them. A whole row of houses, lining both sides of the road, all lit up, all with smoke, rising from their chimneys. I was driving through a town, but there wasn't supposed to be a town here. Shale Hollow was supposed to be dead, abandoned, buried, yet here it was, spread out in front of me like it had never left, like it was still 1946 and the coal was still flowing and the company store was still open. I saw people. They were standing on the porches, in the yards, by the side of the road, men in work clothes and flat caps, women in long dresses, children in bare feet, all of them standing perfectly still, watching my car pass. Their faces were pale, gaunt, eyes sunken and dark. None of them moved. None of them waved or acknowledged me beyond that unblinking stare. I wanted to stop. Some part of my nurse brain wanted to roll down the window and ask if they needed help, if they were okay, because they didn't look okay. They looked sick, starving, but my hands wouldn't obey. I kept driving, slowly, maybe 10 miles per hour, and the town just kept going. More houses, a church with a white steeple, a general store with Raven Ridge Company Store painted on the side in faded letters. All of it lit up, all of it occupied, all of it wrong. And then I saw the mine entrance. It was at the far end of town, carved into the side of the mountain. A black mouth surrounded by timber supports, rail tracks leading into the darkness. There were men standing at the entrance, dozens of them, all facing the road, all watching me. They were covered in coal dust, their faces blackened, their eyes white and staring. Some of them were holding pickaxes and shovels. Others were empty-handed, their arms hanging limp at their sides. One of them stepped onto the road. I hit the gas. My car lurched forward, engine roaring, and the man, if he was a man, didn't move, just stood there as I swerved around him. I heard something hit the side of my car, a heavy thud, and then more of them were stepping onto the road, blocking my path. I swerved again, tires skidding in the dirt, and clipped one of them. The impact felt wrong, like I'd hit a sack of grain instead of a person. Soft and yielding and too light. My headlights cut out completely. I was driving blind, one hand on the wheel, the other groping for my phone, for anything that could give me light. The road dipped sharply, and I felt the car bounce over something. Rocks, roots, bodies, I don't know. And then suddenly, my headlights came back on, and I was out. The forest opened up, The road widened, and I was on pavement again, smooth and modern, with yellow lines painted down the middle. I pulled over immediately, shaking so hard I could barely breathe, and checked my mirrors. The road behind me was empty. No town, no lights, no people. Just trees and darkness. I looked at my phone. It was 4:47 a.m. I'd been on the shale cut for 7 hours. When I examined my car the next morning, there were scratches all along the passenger side, deep gouges in the paint, and a dent in the front bumper. There was also something tucked under my windshield wiper, a piece of paper, yellowed and brittle, folded in half. I opened it carefully, and it was a pay stub from the Raven Ridge Coal Company, dated February 12, 1946, made out to a man named Samuel Hicks. The amount was listed in scrip, not dollars. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe as proof, maybe as a warning. I finished my contract at Beckworth Regional, but I didn't renew. I moved to a hospital in Ohio, closer to cities, closer to people, closer to anywhere that wasn't coal country. I still think about those faces, those hollow eyes, those men standing at the mine entrance. I think about how they were waiting, how they're still waiting, how they'll always be waiting. And I think about how many people take that shortcut every year, how many of them make it through, and how many don't. If you're ever driving through southern West Virginia and someone offers you directions through a place called Shale Hollow or the Shale Cut, don't take them. Find another way. Take the long way around, because some towns don't stay buried, and some debts never get paid, and some people don't want to be saved. They just want company.
The next testimony comes from a truck driver who learned that the worst thing you can see on a coal country back road isn't what's in front of your headlights, it's what follows them.
My name's Sam. I'm from Gary, Indiana, and I was 42 when this happened in March of 2018. I'd been driving long-haul trucks for almost 20 years, most of that time running routes through the Midwest and Appalachia, picking up and delivering everything from auto parts to furniture to, coal. I'd driven every kind of road you can imagine, interstates, state highways, county roads, logging trails that barely qualified as roads at all, and I'd seen my share of weird stuff. Dead animals in the road that shouldn't exist in North America, hitchhikers who vanished when you looked in your mirror, fog that moved against the wind. You drive enough nights alone and you see things. Most of the time you just keep driving and try not to think about it. But what happened on Route 52 in West Virginia was different. That wasn't something I could just file away and forget. I was hauling a load of industrial equipment from Cleveland to Charlotte, and I'd taken a route that cut through southern West Virginia to save some time. It was a Thursday night, just past midnight, and I was running ahead of schedule, feeling good. The weather was clear, roads were dry, and I had a full tank and a fresh thermos of coffee. Route 52 was a good road for trucks, 2 lanes, well-maintained, not too many steep grades, and it ran through coal country for about 60 miles before connecting to I-77. Around mile marker 47, I passed a rest area, one of those bare-bones pull-offs with just a couple of picnic tables and a pit toilet, no lights, no services. There was one vehicle parked there, an old sedan with its hood up, and I thought about stopping to see if they needed help. But it was late, the area was deserted, and I had a schedule to keep. I flashed my lights as I passed, a little signal that I'd seen them, and kept going. Maybe 5 miles later, I noticed headlights in my mirror. Now, it's not unusual to see another vehicle on the road, even at midnight, especially on a route that trucks use. But these headlights were close, maybe 50 yards back, and they were matching my speed exactly. I was doing 60 in a 65 zone. Trucks are governed. I can't go much faster than that. And this car was just sitting there in my blind spot, not passing, not dropping back. I changed lanes to give them room to pass. They changed lanes behind me, staying right there. I slowed down to 55. They slowed down. I sped back up to 60. They sped up. Okay, I thought, probably just someone half asleep, following my taillights without thinking about it. It happens. I decided to let it go, focus on the road, and eventually they'd either pass or turn off. But they didn't. For the next 15 miles, those headlights stayed exactly 50 yards behind me, never closer, never farther. I tried slowing down to 40, thinking they'd get impatient and go around. They slowed to 40. I tried speeding up to 65, pushing the governor. They stayed locked on. I started to get annoyed. Then I started to get uneasy. There was something too precise about it, too deliberate. I grabbed my CB radio and called out, asked if anyone else was on 52, asked if anyone could see what kind of vehicle was behind me. No response, just static. I tried my cell phone, thinking I'd call the company dispatcher, but I didn't have a signal. Not unusual in coal country, but the timing felt wrong. Around mile marker 62, the road entered a long stretch of forest. No houses, no streetlights, just trees pressing in on both sides. The headlights behind me suddenly went dark. Just like that. 1 second they were there, the next they were gone. I watched my mirrors, expecting to see them reappear, thinking maybe they'd turned off or had a mechanical problem. But there was nothing. Just the empty road behind me, stretching into blackness. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt like I'd just lost track of something dangerous. I kept driving, faster now, pushing 68, 69, maxing out the governor. I wanted to get out of that stretch of forest, back into open country where I could see what was around me. The road climbed and twisted, cutting through the mountains, and my rig's engine worked hard, gears downshifting on the steep grades. Then I saw it in the road ahead. A figure, standing in the middle of my lane, maybe 100 yards out, illuminated in my high beams. Tall, human-shaped, but wrong. It was too thin, too long, limbs that didn't quite match human proportions, and it was facing me, standing perfectly still, like it had been waiting. I laid on the horn, one long blast, expecting it to move, expecting it to run. It didn't. It just stood there. I was doing 65, maybe 70 yards away now, and I had to make a decision, swerve or brake. You don't swerve a fully loaded semi unless you want to jackknife or roll, so I hit the brakes hard, felt the ABS judder, felt the trailer start to shimmy behind me. I stopped maybe 20 feet from it, close enough to see it clearly, close enough to see that it wasn't human. It was shaped like a person, but it was made of something else, something black and wet, like it had been pulled out of a coal seam and given a form. Its head was smooth and featureless, no face, just a blank expanse. Its arms hung down to its knees, fingers too long, and it was dripping, leaving a puddle on the asphalt that reflected my headlights like oil. I sat there, hands locked on the wheel, heart hammering, and it didn't move. Just stood there, 10 feet in front of my truck, like it was daring me to get out, like it was waiting for me to do something stupid. Then I heard the tapping. Tap, 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 tap. It was coming from the passenger door of the cab. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I'd see. And there was another one, pressed against the window, its blank head tilted like it was trying to look inside, one too long finger tapping on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I shouted something, I don't even remember what, and threw the truck into reverse. The beeping alarm started screaming as I backed up, and the thing in the road started walking toward me. Not running, not hurrying, just walking with this fluid, unnatural gait like it was gliding. The one at my window kept tapping, faster now, harder, and I heard the glass crack. I stopped reversing, yanked the wheel, and pulled a J-turn, which is insane in a semi, but I wasn't thinking clearly. The truck lurched, the trailer swung wide, and I nearly flipped the whole rig. But I got it pointed back the way I'd come, and I floored it, or as much as you can floor a loaded truck. The thing in the road was behind me now, but I could see it in my mirror, standing in the middle of the highway, arms raised like it was beckoning me to come back. I drove for maybe 3 miles before I saw the headlights again. Same position, 50 yards back, matching my speed. And I realized they hadn't been following me. They'd been herding me, driving me toward that thing, whatever it was, like a sheepdog pushing livestock into a pen. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I drove back to the rest area I'd passed earlier, the one with the broken-down sedan, and there were lights on now, people moving around. I pulled in, set the brake, and practically fell out of the cab. There was a family there, Mom, Dad, 2 kids, working on their car, and they looked startled to see me stumbling toward them, shouting about something in the road. The dad, a guy in his 50s with grease on his hands, asked me if I was okay. I told him what I'd seen, and his face went pale. He looked at his wife, and she grabbed the kids and ushered them into the car. The dad told me they'd been stuck there for 3 hours, waiting for a tow truck, and nobody had stopped to help. He said they'd heard something in the woods while they were waiting, something moving parallel to the road, and it had spooked them enough that they'd locked themselves in the car. He asked me if I'd driven north or south. I said south, toward Charlotte. He said, "Don't go back that way. There's something wrong with the road tonight. A trucker came through about an hour ago, said the same thing. Saw something in the road, something that shouldn't be there. He turned around and went back to Bluefield." I asked him where the nearest town was, someplace with people and lights and police. He said Welch was about 20 miles north, back the way I'd come. I thanked him, got back in my truck, and drove north. I didn't care about the schedule anymore. I didn't care about the load. I just wanted off that road. When I reached Welch, I pulled into the first open gas station I found and went inside. The clerk, a woman in her 60s, took one look at me and asked if I'd been on 52. I said yes, and she just nodded, like she'd heard it all before. She said Route 52 was bad at night, especially the stretch through the Tug Valley. She said people saw things there, things that came up from the old mines, things that had been breathing coal dust and darkness for so long they'd become part of it. She said the locals knew to avoid that stretch after midnight, but truckers and tourists didn't, and every few months someone would come into town with a story just like mine. I asked her if anyone had ever gone missing on that road. She said more than she could count. She said the state police didn't like to talk about it, called them runaways or accidents, but the locals knew better. She said the road was hungry, had been hungry since the mines closed and the coal stopped flowing. Said it wanted something in return for all those years of men going into the earth and pulling out its insides. I stayed in Welch that night, got a motel room, and didn't drive again until the sun was up. When I went back to my truck the next morning, there was a crack in the passenger window, a long spiderweb fracture, and black smudges on the glass like someone had pressed their hand against it. Handprints, but wrong. 4 fingers instead of 5, each one too long. I filed a report with my company, told them I'd had a mechanical issue and had to lay over in Welch. I didn't mention what I'd seen. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I never took Route 52 again. I added an extra 100 miles to my routes if it meant avoiding that road, avoiding those mountains, avoiding whatever was out there waiting in the dark. I talked to a few other drivers at truck stops after that, asked them if they'd ever seen anything strange on 52. Most of them said no. But a few, just a few, got this look in their eyes, this 1,000-yard stare, and they'd shake their heads and walk away. And I knew they'd seen it too. They just didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to remember. I'm retired now. Haven't been in a truck in 3 years. But I still think about that night. I think about the thing standing in the road, the tapping on my window, the headlights that herded me like prey. And I think about all the trucks that go through coal country every night, all the drivers who don't know the rules, who don't know what's waiting out there. I hope they're lucky. I hope they don't stop. Because some things don't want your help. They just want you to stop long enough to pull you under.
Our next story comes from a geologist who went into coal country to study the land and discovered that the mountains there remember everything, especially those who've wronged them.
This happened in the fall of 2015. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm from Seattle, Washington, and at the time I was 36 years old, working as a geologist for an environmental consulting firm. We'd been contracted by a renewable energy company to survey several sites in eastern Kentucky for potential wind farm development. It was my job to assess the bedrock stability, map the subsurface, and make sure there weren't any old mine shafts or sinkholes that could compromise the turbine foundations. I'd been in coal country before, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, parts of Virginia, but never this deep into Appalachia. The site we were surveying was in Harlan County, Kentucky, about 15 miles outside the town of Harlan itself, way up in the mountains where the roads turned to gravel and the cell service disappeared. Beautiful country if you like isolation. Steep ridges covered in hardwood forest, deep hollows where the sun barely reached, creeks running black with iron and old coal residue. I was working with a local guide, a man named Dale, who'd grown up in the area and knew the terrain. He was in his 60s, quiet, with the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of outdoor work. He drove a beat-up pickup with a winch on the front and a rifle rack in the back, and he knew every trail, every switchback, every abandoned mine entrance in a 50-mile radius. We were up on a ridge one afternoon, taking core samples, when Dale asked me if I'd heard about the Blackwater event. I said no, and he explained that back in 1973, there'd been a major disaster at the Blackwater mine, one of the big underground operations that had employed half the county. A fire broke out deep in the mine, faulty ventilation, electrical spark, something like that, and the company tried to seal it off rather than evacuate. 37 men were trapped inside. The fire burned for weeks, poison in the air, and by the time they finally broke through, everyone was dead. Carbon monoxide mostly, but some of the bodies were never recovered, lost in collapsed tunnels or buried under rubble. Company paid out some settlements, Dale said, loading another core sample into the truck, but not much, and they reopened the mine 6 months later, said it was safe. Most folks didn't have a choice. It was work in the mine or move away, and nobody had the money to move, so they went back in. But things were different after that. People heard things down there, voices, footsteps, tapping on the walls. Some guys refused to go into certain sections, said it felt wrong, like they were being watched, and there were accidents, more than usual. Cave-ins, equipment failures, guys just disappearing during their shift and turning up days later in closed-off sections. No idea how they got there. I asked him if the mine was still operating. He shook his head. Closed in 91. Seam ran out, or at least that's what the company said. But there's still entrances all over these mountains. Old shafts and adits that got sealed with cinder blocks or just left open. Some of them are on this ridge. He pointed east, toward a section of forest that looked no different from the rest. There's one about a mile that way. It's on the survey map, marked as sealed, but the seal's been breached. Kids go in there sometimes. Daredevil stuff. Every few years, we find someone who got lost or hurt, and we have to go pull them out. I made a note of it, figured we'd need to flag that area as unstable. Dale and I worked until the sun started to set, then packed up and headed back to town. He dropped me off at the motel I was staying in, a little 2-story place called the Ridgeview Inn, the kind where the TV only gets 3 channels and the water pressure is a suggestion, and said he'd pick me up again at dawn. That night, I was going over the day's data in my room when my laptop started glitching. The screen flickered, files opened and closed on their own, and the cursor moved around like someone else was controlling it. I figured it was a virus or a hardware issue, so I shut it down and pulled out my paper maps and notes instead. Around 11, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Slow, heavy footsteps, like someone in work boots. They stopped outside my door. I waited for a knock, but it never came. Just silence. I looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps started again, moving away, and I heard them descend the stairs at the end of the hall. I told myself it was another guest, maybe a trucker passing through, and tried to go back to my work. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been standing outside my door hadn't left. They were still there, just out of sight, waiting. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, Dale picked me up as promised, and we drove back up to the ridge. I mentioned the laptop issue, and he gave me a funny look. "Electronics don't work right up here," he said. "Hasn't been that way since the Blackwater fire. Something about the mineral content in the rock, or the old wiring from the mine. Nobody's sure. But compasses spin, phones die, radios go static. You learn to navigate the old-fashioned way." We hiked out to the eastern section of the ridge, where the breached mine entrance was supposed to be. It took us about an hour of scrambling over deadfall and up steep inclines. But eventually we found it. A black hole in the side of the mountain, maybe 7 feet high and 6 feet wide, framed with rotting timbers. The cinder blocks that had sealed it were scattered around the entrance, broken and shoved aside. There were beer cans and cigarette butts near the opening, evidence that people had been here recently. Dale shone his flashlight into the darkness, and I could see the tunnel extended back maybe 30 or 40 feet before it turned or collapsed. Hard to tell. The air coming out of the entrance was cold and damp, and it smelled like sulfur and decay. "We need to mark this on the map," I said, pulling out my GPS unit. It was dead, even though I charged it overnight. Damn it. Dale took a piece of spray paint from his pack and marked a nearby tree with an X. "Old school," he said. "Works better anyway." We were about to leave when I heard something from inside the mine, a sound like metal scraping on rock, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Dale heard it too. He aimed his flashlight back into the tunnel, but the beam didn't reach far enough to show us what was making the noise. "Probably just the mountain settling," he said, but his voice was tight. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was silence, and then I heard something else. A voice, faint and distant, calling out. It sounded like someone saying help, but the acoustics were strange, distorted, like the voice was coming from very far away and very close at the same time. I looked at Dale. He was staring into the mine entrance, his jaw set. "We should go," he said. "Someone might be hurt in there," I said, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave. "Nobody's in there," Dale said firmly. "Not alive." But I couldn't just walk away. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped toward the entrance, and called out, "Hello, is someone there? Do you need help?" The voice came again, clearer now. "Help, please, I'm lost." It was a man's voice, hoarse and desperate, and it was coming from deep in the tunnel. Without thinking, I stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately, and the smell intensified. Sulfur, rot, and something else. Something chemical. My flashlight beam wobbled over the walls, which were shored up with old timbers and rusted cables. The floor was uneven, covered in rockfall and puddles of stagnant water. "Where are you?" I called. My voice echoed, bouncing off the walls, multiplying. "Down here. Please hurry." I moved forward, following the voice, and Dale followed reluctantly behind me, his flashlight joining mine. The tunnel sloped downward, twisting to the left, and the timbers got older, more rotten. I could see graffiti on the walls, names, dates, crude drawings, but some of it looked old, decades old. We walked for maybe 5 minutes, descending deeper into the mountain, and the voice kept calling out, always just ahead, always out of sight. "Please, I'm hurt. I can't find the way out." "We're coming," I called back, even though something about this felt wrong, felt off. Why couldn't we see him? Why was his voice always the same distance away? Dale grabbed my arm. "Sarah, we need to go. Now." "But that's not a person," he said, his voice low and urgent. "That's what the mind does. It calls you deeper. It wants you to get lost." I stopped, shining my light down the tunnel ahead. It extended into darkness. No end in sight. And I realized Dale was right. We'd been walking downward for too long, gone too far. The entrance should have been visible behind us. But when I turned around, all I saw was more tunnel, more darkness. "Which way is out?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Dale turned slowly, scanning with his flashlight, and I saw his face go pale. "I don't know," the voice called again, but this time it was behind us. "Why did you leave me? Come back down." We ran. I don't care how it sounds. We ran, stumbling over rocks, splashing through puddles, banging into walls. Dale was ahead of me, his flashlight beam jerking wildly, and I followed him blindly, praying he knew the way. The voice followed us, multiplying, overlapping, a chorus of men calling out in pain and anger and desperation. "Come back! Don't leave us! You took our coal! You owe us!" The tunnel twisted and turned, and I lost all sense of direction. My lungs burned, my legs ached, and just when I thought we were lost forever, I saw light ahead. Real light, daylight, the entrance. We burst out of the mine and into the forest, gasping, and I collapsed against a tree, shaken. Dale was bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. "I told you," he said between breaths. "I told you nobody's in there." "What was that?" I managed to ask. "The mine," he said. "It's full of them. The men who died in the fire. The ones who never got out. The ones who've been lost in there over the years. They don't want to be alone. So they call to you. Try to get you to come deeper. And if you go far enough, you don't come back." We hiked back to the truck in silence. When we reached it, I noticed my flashlight was dead, and so was Dale's, even though both had fresh batteries. My watch had stopped at 11:37, though it was clearly mid-afternoon, and when I checked my hands, there was black residue on them, coal dust, even though I hadn't touched any coal. We drove back to town, and I told Dale I needed to return to Seattle, that I'd file my report remotely. He didn't argue. He just nodded and said, "Probably for the best." I submitted my report to the company, marked the site as unsuitable for development due to subsurface instability and the presence of unmapped mine workings. The wind farm project was scrapped. I didn't mention the voices or the mine that rearranged itself. I didn't think anyone would believe me. But I kept the flashlight, the one that died in the mine. And sometimes late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment in Seattle, it flickers on by itself, just for a second, and I hear it again, faint but clear, like it's coming from inside the walls. A voice calling out, asking for help, asking me to come back. I never will. Whatever's in that mountain, whatever those men became, they're not looking for rescue. They're looking for company, and I'll die before I give them that.
This next account comes from someone who broke down on a coal country back road and learned that the worst breakdowns aren't mechanical. They're the ones where you realize too late that you've stopped in someone else's territory.
My name's Victoria. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. And this happened when I was 29, in January of 2020, right before the pandemic hit, and everything got weird in a different way. I'd been visiting my grandmother in Pike County, up in the far eastern corner of the state, basically on the Virginia border. She was 93, in declining health, and I'd driven up to spend a few days with her, help her around the house, make sure she was eating and taking her medications. The visit went well, but I'd stayed longer than I planned, and by the time I left, it was already 4 p.m, winter sun already sinking. I had a 6-hour drive back to Louisville, and I knew I'd be getting in late, but I figured I'd be fine. I had a full tank, my phone was charged, and the roads were clear. No snow, no ice, just cold and dry. I took US 23 south out of Pikeville, planning to cut west on the Mountain Parkway. But about an hour into the drive, I got a text from my roommate saying she'd locked herself out of our apartment and needed me to let her in. She had a job interview the next morning and was panicking. I told her I'd get there as soon as I could, and I looked at my GPS for a faster route. It suggested a shortcut, a state route that cut through the mountains and would save me about 45 minutes. I didn't recognize the road, but the GPS showed it as a solid line, not a dotted one, so I figured it was paved and maintained. I took the exit and followed the directions. The road was paved, technically, but just barely. It was narrow, potholed, and it climbed steeply into the mountains, twisting and turning so sharply I had to slow to 25 miles per hour. The forest here was dense, old-growth trees that shut out the last of the daylight, and there were no houses, no driveways, no signs of people, just woods and the occasional glimpse of a creek far below the road. I'd been on the road for maybe 20 minutes when my car started making a noise, a grinding metallic sound from somewhere in the engine. I'm not mechanically inclined. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't good. The sound got louder, more insistent, and then the temperature gauge spiked into the red, and the check engine light came on. I pulled over onto a narrow shoulder, barely wide enough for my sedan, and popped the hood. Steam was hissing out from around the edges, and when I opened it, I could see coolant sprayed all over the engine block. A hose had burst, or something had failed. I couldn't tell, but I knew the car wasn't drivable. If I tried to keep going, I'd blow the engine completely. I grabbed my phone to call for a tow truck. No signal, not even one bar. I tried walking up the road, holding the phone up, but nothing. I was stuck. I looked around, trying to figure out my options. The sun was down now, and the temperature was dropping fast. It was already below freezing, and my breath came out in white clouds. I could stay in the car and wait for someone to drive by, but I hadn't seen another vehicle since I'd turned onto this road. I could try to walk, but I didn't know how far it was to the next town, and I wasn't dressed for a winter hike. Just jeans, a sweater, and a light jacket. I decided to give it an hour. If nobody came by, I'd start walking. I got back in the car, turned on the heat, and locked the doors. I had about half a tank of gas, enough to keep the engine running for warmth for a while. I pulled out a protein bar from my bag and ate it slowly, trying to stay calm. This was fine. Someone would come by. I'd get a signal eventually. It was fine. About 20 minutes later, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. I felt a wave of relief and immediately got out of the car, waving my arms to flag them down. The vehicle was a pickup truck, old and battered, and it slowed as it approached. The driver rolled down his window, a man, probably in his 50s, with a beard and a camo jacket. He looked me over, looked at my car, and then asked what the problem was. I explained about the coolant hose, and he nodded like he'd seen it before. "You're not going to make it out of here tonight," he said. "Not without a tow, and no tow trucks coming up this road in the dark. Too dangerous." I asked if there was a town nearby, somewhere I could get help. He scratched his beard and said, "Nearest town with services is about 30 miles back the way you came. But there's a place closer, a gas station, about 5 miles up the road. Older guy runs it. Name's Earl. He might be able to help you out, at least let you use a phone." I asked if he could give me a ride there. He hesitated, looked at my car again, and then nodded. "Yeah, I can do that, but you'll have to leave your car here. You got anything valuable in it?" I grabbed my purse, my phone, and my overnight bag, locked the car, and climbed into his truck. It smelled like cigarettes and oil, and the interior was cluttered with fast food wrappers and tools. He didn't say much as we drove, just kept his eyes on the road, and I tried to make small talk, asked him where he was headed. He said he lived up in the hills, had a place off one of the dirt roads. He asked what I was doing out here, and I explained about visiting my grandmother. He nodded. "You picked a bad road to break down on," he said. "People don't come through here much, and the folks who do live here, well, they keep to themselves." Something about the way he said it made me uneasy, but I didn't know what else to do. I was cold, I was stranded, and he was my only option. We drove for about 10 minutes and I started to notice things. The odometer wasn't moving. The gas gauge was stuck on empty. And there were scratches on the inside of the passenger door, long gouges like someone had been trying to claw their way out. I glanced at the driver. He was staring straight ahead, hands tight on the wheel, and his jaw was clenched. I asked him how much farther to the gas station, and he didn't answer, just kept driving. "Excuse me," I said louder. "How much farther?" He turned his head slowly, and I saw his eyes. They were wrong, cloudy like cataracts, but worse, like there was nothing behind them, like he was looking at me but not seeing me. "Not much farther," he said, and his voice was flat, toneless. I reached for the door handle, thinking I'd jump out, but it wouldn't move. The lock was broken or jammed or something. I pulled harder, panic rising, and the driver just kept driving, winding deeper into the mountains, away from the road onto a dirt path I hadn't seen before. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "To Earl," he said, "like I told you." "This isn't the way to a gas station." "Earl doesn't run a gas station anymore," the driver said, "but he'll be happy to see you. He doesn't get many visitors." I tried the door again, slamming my shoulder into it, and it suddenly flew open. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I just jumped. I hit the ground hard, rolled, felt pain shoot through my shoulder and hip, but I scrambled to my feet and ran. The truck didn't stop. It just kept going, disappearing into the darkness, and I was alone on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, freezing, hurt, and lost. I ran back the way we'd come, or at least the direction I thought we'd come from. The forest was pitch black, no moon, no stars, just the sound of my breath and my footsteps and the occasional crack of a branch. I didn't have my phone. I'd left it in the truck along with my bag. I had nothing. I ran for what felt like an hour, my lungs burning, my legs shaking, and eventually I saw a light ahead. Not headlights, a stationary light, like a porch light or a lantern. I stumbled toward it, desperate, and found a building. It was small, wooden, with a tin roof and a faded sign that read Earl's Service. The windows were dark, but the door was open, creaking in the wind. I went inside. I didn't have a choice. The interior was a single room, cluttered with old tools, cans of motor oil, spare tires. There was a desk in the corner covered in papers and dust, and a calendar on the wall stuck on March 1987. The place smelled like mildew and rust and something else, something rotten. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" No answer. I moved deeper into the room, and that's when I saw it. A trapdoor in the floor, partially hidden under a greasy tarp. It was open, just a crack, and I could see stairs leading down into darkness, and I could hear voices. Low, murmuring voices coming from below. I backed away, slowly, and that's when the door behind me slammed shut. I spun around, and there was a man standing in the doorway. Old, gaunt, with hollow eyes and skin like wax. He was wearing coveralls stained with oil and something darker. "You must be Jennifer," he said. His voice was soft, almost kind. "We've been waiting for you." I asked him who he was, even though I already knew. He smiled, showing teeth that were too small, too sharp. "I'm Earl," he said, "and you shouldn't have come here. But since you did, well, you might as well stay." He stepped toward me, and I heard footsteps on the stairs below, coming up from the cellar. More voices, more people, all of them murmuring, all of them saying my name. I ran at him, shoved him as hard as I could, and he was lighter than he should have been, like he was hollow. He stumbled, and I bolted through the door and into the night. I ran blindly, crashing through the forest, branches tearing at my face and arms, and I didn't stop until I saw another light. Headlights this time, real headlights on a real road. I stumbled onto the pavement, waving my arms, and a car screeched to a halt. It was a state trooper. He got out, asked me what happened, and I tried to explain, but I couldn't form coherent sentences. I just kept saying I needed to get out of here. I needed to leave. He put me in the back of his cruiser, gave me a blanket, and drove me to a hospital in Hazard. They treated me for hypothermia, cuts, and bruises. The trooper asked me questions, took my statement, but I could tell he didn't believe half of it. He said they'd send someone to check on my car, see if they could find the truck or the gas station I'd described, but I knew they wouldn't find anything. A few days later, the trooper called me. He said they'd located my car. It was still on the shoulder where I'd left it, but there was no dirt road nearby, no gas station, no building called Earl's Service. He said the area I'd described didn't exist, at least not on any map. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. And when I picked up my car, after it had been towed and repaired, I found something in the back seat. My overnight bag, the one I'd taken with me into the truck. It was covered in dirt and smelled like oil and rot, and inside, folded neatly, was a calendar page torn from a wall, March 1987, with a date circled in red, January 14th, the day I broke down. I don't drive through coal country anymore. I don't take shortcuts, and I don't trust GPS routes that promise to save me time. Because some roads don't lead where you think they do, and some people aren't offering help. They're offering something much worse.
Our next testimony comes from a park ranger who learned that the most dangerous thing in coal country state forests isn't the wildlife. It's what's been waiting since long before the parks were ever established.
My name's Thomas. I'm from Morgantown, West Virginia, and I was 38 when this happened, in the summer of 2016. I'd been working as a park ranger for about 10 years at that point, mostly at smaller state parks and forests throughout Appalachia. Good job if you like the outdoors, low pay but decent benefits, and it kept me in shape. I dealt with everything you'd expect: lost hikers, bear encounters, illegal campers, the occasional marijuana grow operation hidden deep in the woods. But nothing prepared me for what I found in Blackstone State Forest. Blackstone is in southern West Virginia, right on the Kentucky border. About 12,000 acres of steep, heavily forested terrain. Used to be coal company land. They strip-mined parts of it in the 50s and 60s, then abandoned it when the coal ran out. The state took it over in the 70s, reforested the stripped areas, built some trails and a small campground. It's not heavily visited, too remote, too hard to access, but we get a few dozen campers and hikers every summer. I'd been assigned to Blackstone for my first full season in 2016, living in a small ranger cabin near the park entrance from May through October. My job was to patrol the trails, maintain the facilities, respond to emergencies, and generally keep an eye on things. The previous ranger, a guy named Bill, had retired the year before, and when I met him to get the handoff, he gave me some advice I thought was strange at the time. "Don't go into the hollow after dark," he said, "and if you hear someone calling for help from in there, don't respond." I asked him what he meant. The hollow was a particularly deep, narrow valley on the eastern edge of the park, heavily wooded, with a creek running through it. There was a trail that ran along the ridge above it, but no official access down into the valley itself. Bill said the hollow had a reputation. People got lost in there, or they reported seeing things, lights, figures, structures that shouldn't be there, and sometimes people went in and didn't come back out. I asked him if he was serious, if this was some kind of hazing ritual for new rangers. He didn't smile. He just said, "I'm serious. You'll understand when you've been there a while. Just stay out of the hollow." I figured he was exaggerating, trying to spook me, so I didn't take it too seriously. I settled into the routine, spent the first few weeks familiarizing myself with the trails and the terrain, and things were fine, quiet, peaceful, exactly what I'd signed up for. Then, in mid-June, I got a call on the park radio. A hiker had reported hearing someone yelling for help from the hollow. She said she'd been on the Ridgeline Trail around noon and heard a man's voice, distant but clear, shouting, "Help me, I'm hurt, I'm down here." She'd tried to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the acoustics in the hollow were strange. Sound bounced around, echoed, made it impossible to tell. She'd called out, asking where he was, but got no response, just silence. She'd hiked out and reported it to me. I thanked her for the report and told her I'd check it out. I grabbed my gear, first aid kit, rope, GPS, radio, and hiked up to the Ridgeline Trail. It was a clear, warm day, the sun high, birds singing, no indication anything was wrong. I stood at the edge of the hollow, looking down into the dense canopy of trees below, and called out, "Hello? This is Park Ranger Thomas. If you're injured and need help, call out so I can locate you." I waited. No response. I tried again, louder. Nothing. I figured maybe the hiker had misheard something. A bird call maybe, or another hiker farther away. But protocol was to investigate, so I found a game trail that led down into the hollow and started descending. It was steep, the footing treacherous, and the temperature dropped noticeably as I went lower. The canopy was so thick here that barely any sunlight reached the forest floor, and everything was damp and overgrown. I called out periodically as I descended, but I got no response. After about 20 minutes, I reached the creek at the bottom. The water was shallow, maybe 6 inches deep, running clear over smooth stones. I could see fish darting in the shallows. Everything seemed normal. I was about to turn back when I saw something on the other side of the creek, a structure. It looked like an old cabin, partially collapsed, made of weathered wood and corrugated metal. I crossed the creek and approached it carefully. The cabin was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with a sagging roof and no door. Inside there was a rusted bed frame, a broken chair, and a table covered in debris. On the walls, someone had carved names and dates, dozens of them, going back decades. The earliest I could make out was 1952. I took some photos with my phone, figuring this was an old miner's cabin or maybe a squatter's shack from before the park was established. But something about it felt wrong. The air inside was colder than it should have been, and there was a smell, faint but unpleasant, like spoiled meat. I was about to leave when I heard the voice, "Help me, please!" It was coming from deeper in the hollow, farther down the creek. Male voice, weak and strained. I called back, asking where he was, and he responded, "I'm hurt. I can't move. Please hurry." I followed the sound, moving carefully along the creek bank, and the hollow got narrower, darker. The cliffs on either side rose higher, blocking out more of the sky, and the forest became almost impenetrable. I had to push through thick underbrush, and I noticed the trees here were different, twisted, gnarled, their bark blackened like they'd been burned. The voice kept calling, always just ahead, and I kept following, even though part of me was starting to remember Bill's warning. After maybe another 10 minutes, I realized I'd lost sight of the creek. I was surrounded by trees, no landmarks, no clear sense of direction. I pulled out my GPS, but it wasn't getting a signal, just a spinning icon, searching. The voice called again. "Please, I'm right here." I stopped. The voice was behind me now. I turned, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. "Where are you?" I called out, and my voice echoed, bouncing off the cliffs, multiplying. "Right here," the voice said, and it was all around me now, coming from every direction at once. I realized what was happening. This wasn't a person. This was the hollow doing what Bill had warned me about, calling, luring, pulling me deeper. I turned and tried to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same. I walked for what felt like an hour, and the hollow just kept going, twisting, extending, like it was growing around me. I found the cabin again. At least I thought it was the same cabin, but the names carved on the walls were different now. Fresh, recent. I saw dates from the 1990s, the 2000s, names I didn't recognize, and at the very bottom, carved into the wood with a shaky hand, was my own name, Thomas, and today's date. I ran. I didn't care about protocol or safety or anything except getting out. I crashed through the underbrush, tripped over roots, fell into the creek and soaked myself, and kept going. The voice followed me, laughing now, a low, mocking sound that echoed through the trees. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw light ahead, real sunlight breaking through the canopy. I climbed, hauled myself up the steep slope, using roots and rocks, and emerged onto the ridgeline trail. I collapsed, gasping, and checked my watch. It was 6:47 p.m. I'd been in the hollow for over 6 hours. I radioed back to the ranger station, reported that I'd found no injured hiker, and returned to the cabin. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the voice, kept seeing my name carved into that wall. The next day, I hiked back up to the ridgeline and looked down into the hollow. I wanted to see if I could spot the cabin in daylight, but I couldn't. The trees were too thick, the terrain too broken. It was like the hollow had swallowed it. Over the rest of the summer, 3 more hikers reported hearing calls for help from the hollow. Each time I investigated from the ridgeline, calling out but never going down. I filed reports, marked the area as hazardous, recommended closing the trail. But the park administration didn't do anything, said it was just people getting disoriented, that there was no evidence of danger. In September, a young couple went missing. They'd been camping in the park and decided to hike down into the hollow, despite the warnings. Search and rescue spent 4 days combing the area, and they found nothing. No sign of the couple, no tracks, no gear. It was like they'd vanished. I quit after that, finished out my season, packed up, and left. I couldn't stay in a place where the land itself was hungry, where it called to people and swallowed them whole. I heard later that the park closed access to the hollow, put up fencing and warning signs, but I also heard that people still go in. They hear the voices, they think someone needs help, and they go down, and they don't come back. I don't know what's in the hollow. I don't know if it's something left over from the mining days, some kind of curse or angry spirits, or if it's just the mountain itself, resentful of being torn apart and left to rot. But I know it's real, and I know Bill was right. Some places don't want to be explored, they want to be left alone, and if you don't respect that, they'll make sure you stay.
This account comes from a long-haul trucker who picked up a hitchhiker on a lonely coal country road and realized far too late that some passengers don't want a ride. They want a witness.
This is Danny. I'm from Parkersburg, West Virginia, and I was 47 when this went down in November of 2019. Been driving big rigs for damn near 25 years, OTR mostly, which means over the road, living out of the cab, running freight across the eastern half of the country. I've seen a lot of weird shit over the years, UFOs, phantom hitchhikers, truck stops that felt wrong, but nothing stuck with me like what happened on Route 119 in southern West Virginia. I was hauling a load of auto parts from Detroit to Charlotte, and I'd decided to cut through West Virginia to save time instead of taking the longer route through Ohio and Virginia. Route 119 runs north-south through some of the most isolated coal country you'll ever see. Old mining towns, most of them half abandoned, connected by a 2-lane road that winds through the mountains like a snake. Beautiful during the day, creepy as hell at night. It was around 10 p.m., middle of November, cold and clear, and I was making good time. I just passed through a town called Del Barton, population maybe 600, and was heading south toward the Kentucky border. The road here was especially dark, no streetlights, just my headlights and the occasional reflector post. I had the radio on, some classic rock station, and I was half listening to Free Bird when I saw him. A guy standing on the shoulder, thumb out, lit up in my headlights like a ghost. Tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a heavy coat and jeans with a duffel bag at his feet. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers, company policy says don't, and besides, it's a good way to get robbed or worse. But something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the fact that he looked genuinely stranded, not threatening. Or maybe it was just the fact that I'd been alone in the cab for 12 hours and wanted someone to talk to. I pulled over, leaned across, and rolled down the passenger window. He walked up, looked in, and said, "You heading south?" I said yeah, all the way to Charlotte if he wanted to ride that far. He said he was trying to get to Kentucky, had family in Pikeville, and he'd really appreciate the lift. His voice was soft, polite, a little hoarse, like he'd been out in the cold for a while. "Hop in," I said, and he climbed into the cab, hauling his duffel bag with him. He settled into the passenger seat, buckled up, and nodded his thanks. I pulled back onto the road and picked up speed. For the first few miles, we didn't talk much. I asked him his name, and he said it was Michael. I asked what he was doing out in the middle of nowhere, and he said he'd been visiting a friend, car broke down, and he'd been trying to get a ride for a couple hours. I asked if he'd called for a tow, and he said there was no signal out here, which I knew was true. Made sense, but the more I looked at him, the more I noticed things that didn't add up. His coat was heavy, insulated, but he wasn't shivering even though it was below freezing outside, and he said he'd been waiting for hours. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were flat, like there was no depth to them, no emotion, and he wasn't blinking. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, and I didn't see him blink once. I tried to make conversation, asked him about his family, about Pikeville, about what he did for work. He answered in short, vague sentences. Yeah, his family was good, he worked construction, Pikeville was nice. But he didn't elaborate, didn't ask me anything in return, just stared straight ahead through the windshield. After about 20 minutes, I started to feel uneasy. There was something wrong about him, something I couldn't put my finger on. I glanced at his duffel bag sitting between his feet, and I noticed it wasn't zipped all the way. There was something inside, something dark and lumpy, and I thought I saw a stain on the fabric, red-brown like dried blood. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was a hunter, maybe it was a deer carcass or something, but hunters don't usually hitchhike with their kills in duffel bags, and besides, it wasn't deer season. I decided to test him. I asked, "So, whereabouts in Pikeville does your family live? I used to know some folks up there." He didn't answer right away, just kept staring through the windshield. Then he said, "Near the old mine, the one that closed." "Which mine?" I asked. "There's a lot of closed mines around Pikeville." He didn't answer. He just turned his head slowly and looked at me. And for the first time, I saw his eyes up close. They weren't flat. They were empty, literally empty. Where his pupils and irises should have been, there was just blackness, like looking into a hole. I jerked my eyes back to the road, heart pounding, and tried to keep my voice steady. "You okay, man?" "I'm fine," he said, and his voice was different now. "Colder? Keep driving?" I glanced at him again, and he was smiling. Not a friendly smile. A smile that showed too many teeth that were too sharp, and his skin was starting to look wrong. Looser, like it wasn't quite attached to his skull. I've been in bad situations before, bar fights, road rage incidents. One time a guy tried to carjack me at a truck stop, but this was different. This was primal, gut-level fear, the kind that makes your lizard brain scream, run. But I was doing 60 in a fully loaded semi, and I couldn't exactly pull over and tell him to get out. So I drove. I kept my eyes on the road and my hands on the wheel, and I tried to think. My CB radio was on the dash, and I thought about calling for help, but who would I call? The nearest town was miles away, and by the time anyone got here, I'd be, what? Dead? Gone? You're scared, Michael said. It wasn't a question. Nah, man, I'm good, I lied. You should be scared, he said. Most people are, when they see me, when they realize. Realize what? He leaned back in his seat, still smiling. That I'm not really here, not the way you think. I asked him what the hell that meant, and he said, I died on this road. 32 years ago, I was trying to get home, get to Pikeville, and someone ran me off the road, left me in a ditch. I froze to death before anyone found me. I didn't say anything. What do you say to that? I've been here ever since, he continued, waiting, trying to get home, but I can't. Every time someone picks me up, I ride with them, but I never make it. Something always happens. We crash, or they kick me out, or they just disappear, and I start over. I'm not going to crash, I said, gripping the wheel tighter. No, he agreed, but you're going to want to. He reached down, unzipped his duffel bag, and pulled something out. It was a skull. Human skull, dirt-stained and cracked, with a few teeth missing. He held it up, turned it so I could see, and said, This is me. This is what's left. It's still in the ditch about 2 miles back. Nobody ever found it. I felt bile rise in my throat. Put that away. Why? It's mine. I should be allowed to hold it. I wanted to stop the truck, wanted to get out and run, but we were in the middle of a mountain pass, nowhere to go. So I did the only thing I could think of. I floored it. The engine roared, the speedometer climbed, 65, 70, 75, way too fast for these roads, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get to the next town, the next truck stop, anywhere with lights and people. Michael laughed. You can't outrun me, I'm already with you. And then he was gone. Just like that. The passenger seat was empty, the duffel bag was gone, and I was alone in the cab. I slammed on the brakes and the truck shuttered and fishtailed, and I barely managed to keep it on the road. I pulled over onto the shoulder, put the rig in park, and sat there shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I checked the cab. Nothing. No sign he'd ever been there. But the passenger seat was cold, ice cold, like someone had left the window open in winter. And there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, like decay. I drove straight through to Charlotte. Didn't stop except for gas, didn't sleep, didn't even eat. When I got to the warehouse and unloaded, I told my dispatcher I needed a few days off. He asked if I was okay, and I said, yeah, just tired. But I wasn't okay. I'm still not okay. I looked it up later, searched online for accidents on Route 119, deaths, disappearances. I found an article from 1987 about a man named Michael Brennan, age 23, who'd gone missing near Del Barton. His car was found abandoned on the shoulder, but he was never found. They assumed he'd wandered into the woods and gotten lost, maybe fell into an old mine shaft. There was a photo with the article, a young guy, dark hair, wearing a heavy coat. It was him. It was the guy I'd picked up. I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. Not on Route 119, not anywhere. Because some people aren't looking for a ride, they're looking for something else. Company maybe, or closure, or just someone to share the weight of what happened to them. And once you let them in, once you see them, you can't unsee them. They're with you. They're always with you.
Our final story tonight comes from a local historian who went searching for the truth about coal country's forgotten towns and found that some history doesn't want to be remembered, it wants to be repeated.
My name is Alan Pritchard. I'm from Charleston, West Virginia, and this happened in the fall of 2018 when I was 53 years old. I've spent most of my adult life researching and documenting the history of Appalachian coal mining communities. The boom towns that sprang up in the early 20th century, flourished for a few decades, and then vanished when the coal ran out or the companies moved on. It's important work, I think, preserving the stories of these places and the people who lived in them before they're completely forgotten. I've been working on a book about lost coal towns in southern West Virginia, and I'd come across references to a place called Ashford that I couldn't find any substantial records for. It appeared on a few old maps from the 1920s and 1930s, located in a remote hollow in Wyoming County, but there were no photographs, no census records, no newspaper articles, nothing that would tell me what the town had been like or what had happened to it. I reached out to local historical societies, interviewed elderly residents in the area, and eventually I met a woman named Ethel who was in her late 80s and had grown up in a town not far from where Ashford had supposedly been. When I mentioned the name, her face went pale. "You don't want to go looking for Ashford," she said. I asked her why, and she told me a story that her grandmother had told her. Back in the 1930s, Ashford had been a company town for the Ashford Coal Company, population maybe 400 or 500. It was deep in the mountains, accessible only by a narrow-gauge railroad that the company operated. The mine was productive for about 15 years, and then something happened. An explosion, deep underground, that killed 30 men and sealed off one of the main shafts. The company wanted to keep the mine running, but the miners refused to go back in. They said they heard things down there after the explosion. Voices, screaming, the sound of picks and shovels even in sections that were supposed to be empty. The company brought in strikebreakers, but they wouldn't stay either. Said the mine was cursed, that the men who died in the explosion were still down there, working. Eventually the company gave up and shut down the mine. They pulled out, dismantled the railroad, and left the town to rot. Most of the residents moved away, but some stayed, too poor or too stubborn to leave. Ethel's grandmother said that by the early 1940s, Ashford was a ghost town, and people who went there reported strange things. Lights in the abandoned houses, sounds of machinery running even though the mine was closed, figures walking the streets at night. My grandmother said the place was angry, Ethel told me. Said it didn't want to be forgotten, but it also didn't want to be found. She told me if I ever came across it, I should turn around and leave. I thanked Ethel for the story, but I wasn't deterred. If anything, I was more interested. A cursed town with a tragic history was exactly the kind of thing my book needed. I spent the next few weeks researching, trying to pinpoint Ashford's location. I found an old surveyor's map from 1935 that showed the town's approximate coordinates, and I cross-referenced it with modern topographical maps. It looked like the site was about 20 miles southeast of the town of Mullins, deep in a hollow with no road access. In late October, I decided to make the trip. I packed camping gear, my camera, a GPS unit, and several days' worth of food and water. I hired a local guide, a man named Ray who'd worked as a logger in the area and knew the terrain. When I told him where I wanted to go, he hesitated. "Nobody goes back in there," he said. "Ground's unstable. Old mines everywhere, sinkholes, black damp. It's dangerous." I offered to pay him double his usual rate, and he reluctantly agreed. We set out on a Friday morning, driving as far as we could on Forest Service roads, then hiking the rest of the way. The terrain was brutal. Steep ridges, thick undergrowth, and Ray was right about the instability. We passed several areas where the ground had collapsed, revealing old mine shafts below, black holes that went down into the earth with no bottom in sight. After about 6 hours of hiking, we found it, the town of Ashford. It was more intact than I'd expected. There were maybe 20 buildings still standing, houses, a church, a general store, what looked like a company office. All of them were in various states of decay, roofs collapsed, walls sagging, windows broken, but they were there, real and solid, not just foundations or ruins. Ray refused to go any closer. He said he'd wait for me at the edge of the clearing, and I could have 2 hours to look around. After that, we were leaving, whether I was ready or not. I agreed, and walked into the town alone. The silence was the first thing that struck me. No birds, no insects, no wind. just dead, oppressive silence. The air smelled like sulfur and decay, and the temperature was noticeably colder than it had been outside the hollow. I took photographs, documented the buildings, made notes in my journal. Everything was fascinating. The architecture, the artifacts I found inside the houses, old furniture, rusted tools, children's toys, the church with its pews still in place and a Bible on the pulpit open to Psalms. I was in one of the houses photographing a kitchen that looked like the occupants had just walked away when I heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable, a pickaxe striking rock, rhythmic, steady. I went outside and followed the sound. It was coming from the far end of town, near the base of the mountain. I walked toward it and found the mine entrance, a black opening framed with rotting timbers, a rusted rail track leading into the darkness. The sound was coming from inside the mine. I stood at the entrance, listening. The pickaxe kept striking over and over, and I realized I could hear voices too. Men's voices, low and indistinct, like they were speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the tunnel. The beam reached maybe 30 feet before it was swallowed by darkness. Against every instinct I had, I stepped inside. The tunnel was cold, colder than the town, and the smell of sulfur was stronger here. I followed the sound of the pickaxe, and the tunnel sloped downward, twisting to the left. The walls were shored up with timbers that looked like they'd been there for decades, and I could see old ore carts sitting on the tracks, half filled with coal. The pickaxe stopped. The voices stopped. Silence. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. I kept walking, and the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. It was a working area with tools scattered around, timber supports holding up the ceiling, and a shaft that descended even deeper into the earth. And there were men. They were standing in the shadows, maybe a dozen of them, all wearing miners' clothes, overalls, helmets with carbide lamps, boots. Their faces were blackened with coal dust, but I could see their eyes, pale and staring. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, watching me. I backed away slowly, and one of them stepped forward. He said something. A question, I think, but I couldn't understand him. His voice was distorted, like he was speaking through water. I turned and ran. I ran back through the tunnel, my flashlight beam jerking wildly, and I could hear them behind me. Footsteps, dozens of them, pounding on the rock, getting closer. I burst out of the mine entrance and kept running, through the town, past the houses and the church, and I didn't stop until I reached Ray. He took one look at my face and said, "We're leaving. Now." We hiked out as fast as we could, practically running, and I didn't look back. When we reached the truck, I was shaking so hard I could barely open the door. Ray drove us back to Mullins, and we didn't talk the whole way. That night, alone in my motel room, I looked at the photographs I'd taken. Most of them were fine, normal shots of buildings, interiors, artifacts. But the last few, the ones I'd taken in the mine, were wrong. The images were distorted, filled with static, and I could see faces. Dozens of faces crowding the frame, staring at the camera. I deleted them. All of them. I deleted every photo from Ashford, and I threw out my notes. I couldn't look at them anymore. A week later, I got a call from Ray. He said he'd gone back to check on the site, see if it was still there. He said he couldn't find it. He'd followed the same route, used the same GPS coordinates, but there was nothing there. Just unbroken forest. No buildings, no mine entrance, no clearing, like Ashford had never existed. I stopped working on the book. I couldn't. Every time I tried to write about Ashford, I heard the pickaxe, heard the voices, saw those faces in the static. I realized that Ethel's grandmother had been right. Ashford didn't want to be forgotten, but it also didn't want to be found. It wanted to exist in that liminal space, trapped between memory and oblivion, and anyone who tried to pull it out, to drag it into the light, would get pulled in instead. I'm retired now. I don't do research anymore. Don't visit old mine sites or forgotten towns, because some places are forgotten for a reason. They're not just lost, they're hidden. And if you go looking for them, if you dig too deep into their history, they'll make sure you become part of that history. Permanent residents of a town that doesn't exist on any map, working a mine that never closed, waiting for the next person who thinks they can uncover the truth. Ashford is still out there. I know it is. And those men are still working, still waiting, still hoping someone will find them. But if you ever come across coordinates that lead to a hollow in Wyoming County, West Virginia, a place that shows up on old maps but not new ones, don't go. Don't try to document it, don't try to save it, and don't try to understand it. Just leave it alone. Because some history is better left buried, and some towns never truly die. They just wait.
These are the stories we received from coal country. 8 accounts from people who thought they knew what danger looked like, who thought they understood the rules of the backroads. But coal country doesn't play by the rules the rest of the world follows. The roads here remember every drop of blood that went into them, every man who went into the earth and didn't come back up, every town that was abandoned and left to rot. And that memory is hungry. It calls out to people, lures them off the main roads, pulls them into hollows and tunnels and forgotten places where time moves differently and the dead don't stay buried. If you drive through coal country, stick to the main highways. Don't take shortcuts. Don't trust GPS routes that promise to save you time. Don't stop for hitchhikers, don't investigate strange lights, and don't go looking for towns that don't appear on modern maps. Because once you step off the path, once you enter that world between the living and the dead, between the present and the past, you might not find your way back. These mountains have been taking people for over a century. They're patient. They can wait. And they're always watching the roads, waiting for the next person who doesn't know better, who thinks they can handle it, who takes that wrong turn at midnight and finds themselves somewhere they shouldn't be. Thank you for listening to Blacktop Files. If you have your own story from the backroads, something you saw or experienced that you can't explain, you can send it to us. And if you're out there driving right now, be safe. Keep your eyes on the road. And whatever you do, don't stop in coal country after dark. We'll see you next time.